October 2019. Martin Scorsese, one of the last 50 years' most prolific directors, now said famously, or infamously, depending on how you view it, in a New York Times interview, when asked about Marvel movies, with his answer applying more outwardly towards superhero movies in general, "I've tried to watch a few of them, and they're not for me." The sentiment from Scorsese being that they seem to be close to theme parks than they are to movies. I've known and loved them throughout my life, and to that end, I don't think they're cinema.
I believe in its promise.
Now, this brought forth a new center stage for criticism in the way of Marvel's Disney has been capitalizing on its interconnected franchise. Its breakout of that year, Avengers Endgame, being the financial and cultural success that it was, making it more apparent than ever that they had a corner hold on the market.
Assemble.
However, that same year, DC, the supposed rivals of Marvel, released their Joker movie. That, whilst a super movie, completely different to most, if not all, Marvel content. Rated R, violent, character-driven, and seemingly uninterested in the bland spectacle of its competition. But one main thing brought up was its similarity to the filmography of the aforementioned Martin Scorsese.
And the Oscar goes to Joaquin Phoenix Joker.
With it winning star Joaquin Phoenix Best Performance by an Actor in a Leading Role at the Oscars, and getting a nomination for Best Picture. This was the first time since superheroes had become mainstream in the wake of Marvel that they were garnering recognition from the Academy. However, what was so painfully obvious was that he achieved this buzz by imitating the type of movies Scorsese would make that would also receive Oscar buzz. This change in how DC looked at the superhero market seemed to influence how they thought about the next standalone superhero adaptation, the Batman. Probably the most famous super of all time, and the most recognizable cultural icons, the Batman seemed to be going to get the same special treatment, much like its character's famous arch-enemy, the Joker. Director Matt Reeves decided to make an effort to, like the Joker, link the movie to something audiences were already going to be some degree familiar to. This time relating very close to the neo-noir genre, particularly the crime movies of the 70s. This seemingly obvious for the character, the idea of the Batman already not so far off, a knockoff of the character Don Diego de la Vega, or as he more commonly known, Zorro. Another fictional billionaire with a cave under his mansion, who at night would dress in all black and fight crime. These similarities so blatant that it was written into Batman mythology that on the night of Batman's parents were killed, they took him to see the mark of Zorro, in some way for the comic runners to address this issue. Regardless, the character of the Batman becoming so iconic, Reeves, who wanted to create his own much darker interpretation, hinted towards media and story beats familiar and subconscious that the movie's audience had eased them into it. The movie's blatant predecessor being 1995's Seven, a movie that epitomizes 90s grunge. That movie's opening sequence, masterfully made by title designer Kyle Cooper, was called by the New York Times to be the most important innovation of the 1990s. Seven's director, David Fincher, behind Seven's visual look and use of music, two things the Batman copies. Closer by Nine Inch Nails and David Bowie's The Heart Filthy Lesson, the songs that play over the opening and closing credits, that coincided with the emotional state of the characters in the beginning and ending of the movie. Batman, significantly longer, more focuses on 2 songs for each its protagonist and villain. The Batman's being Something in the Way by Nirvana, a song that hits at the abstraction of his existence.
Murder, robberies, assault. 2 years later, they're all up. And now this.
Within the city, as not understood by the image of fear.
The city's eating itself.
The Riddler, a classical piece, Ave Maria, composed by Frank Sherbert in 1825, a song often played at funerals that resonates the Riddler's reputation as a harbinger of death.
Detective Somerset? I'm Detective Mills. Anything about the kill?
7's other influence from the movie being the visual style it takes the Batman imitates. Unlike Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy, that attempts at realism shows everything in blues, greys, and oranges, or Burton's gothic look that drenched everything in a purplish blue, or even the Joel Schumacher campy vibrance of blues and red, the Batman is nearly always matted in black, with often only one light source illuminating the scene. Understandable. In 7, with director Fincher coming from a background directing music videos. But by emulating this, Reeves establishes a darker tone in the movie, and hints towards the ending. Both films have similar plots, with 2 detectives hunting down a serial killer who's killing in a pattern, before catching the killer, revealing his most devastating blow once in custody. Now, whilst it here differs from the Batman's, ending much less somber, the final message of 7 being that the world is an emotionless, cold place that despite all of its misgivings must be protected.
Ernest Hemingway once wrote, "The world is a fine place and worth fighting for." I agree with the second part.
Or anyone
However,
else.
the Batman ending on the idea that you can be a better hero and protector as an image of a savior rather than that of vengeance.
The hell are you supposed to be?
I'm vengeance.
However, Reeves's look for the film looks to reference more than just Fincher's filmography, looking again primarily at 70s crime and neo-noir. Neo-noir itself not being particularly well-defined genre, named after noir genre, has a new version, that neo meaning new. The neo-noir genre coming to fruition in the 60s and 70s, but was only referred to as such to separate it from traditional noirs, which itself was a genre named retrospectively. The only difference that with neo-noir there were no longer strong moral guidelines to be restricted by, the heyday of traditional noir being the mid-30s through early 50s, and whilst being at the time viewed as most risque of genres, it was still heavily policed by a system referred to as the Haid Code, something created to stop the government from limiting what people could see, but still pretty harshly cutting down on what could be shown in film. Neo-noir, which just means noir without those priorly mentioned restrictions, newer, bigger, better, and much, much darker. The Batman, very self-referentially using the title, with itself much less policed and thus darker interpretation of the superhero genre. The movie's characters also resembling 70s thriller protagonist, the titular Batman much more in line with the protagonist of the period. The character of the Batman was thought up in an era of the leading men being clean-shaven, polite, well-mannered, but smart on their feet gentlemen like Cary Grant or Clark Gable. But after Marlon Brando's rise with performances as Terry Malloy and On the Waterfront, a more emotional hero was preferred. Brando brought an energy unseen in protagonists, like a caged animal, he wasn't clean and sharp. He played broken, tough guys, people pushed to their emotional lengths. And much like this, Robert Pattinson's Batman, is much more crazed, bloodshot, and dirtied. Most of the movie, the 2 years of bloody nights had taken a toll on him and given him a dark weight to his character.
2 years of nights have turned me into a nocturnal animal.
It's especially prevalent when compared to the most famous interpretation of a character by Christian Bale, who comes across as an emotionally reserved and in control. Similarly, the Riddler, who is portrayed much more darkly in this interpretation, takes after visually his message after the famous 1960s serial killer, the Zodiac.
Search goes on in San Francisco for the man known as the Zodiac Killer. The elements involved today included psychiatrists, astrologists, and police guards for school buses. Terry Drinkwater reports.
School children are nice targets. I shall wipe out a school bus some morning, shoot out the tires, and then pick off the kiddies as they come bounding out. That was the threat of the Zodiac Killer. Now, every day, police cars follow the buses which would be likely targets. Officers armed with shotguns take the threat seriously. The psychotic killer has already murdered 5. 1 at a lover's lane near a lake just north of San Francisco. 3 others in nearby Vallejo. The latest, a taxi driver in San Francisco. The Zodiac Killer seems to crave publicity. He sent letters and cryptograms to newspapers and the police, recounting his crimes, threatening more murders, and making Bay Area residents very edgy.
Considered the most famous unsolved murder case in American history, the Zodiac's now famous mask is a clear inspiration for the Riddler's design. And with the real killer's identity never being realized, the movie's hints to a darker tone, not just linking to reality, but a world where sometimes the bad guy wins.
Special thanks to everyone for the tips on detonators.
The action of the movie additionally being stylized in a way familiar to older movies. Man's fights feel heavier, he hits harder, he moves faster, adding a reality to his movement and reminding us he feels pain. Not relying on the god of physics often seen in contemporary action movies instead of a bulkier look that emphasizes a scrappiness and more vicious attack. Only, possibly the most famous sequence in the movie, the car chase very much harkens to action set pieces of old. When filming, very specifically attaching cameras to cars, it giving the crashes and bumps more visceral feel, putting the audience in the seat of the driver. Also hinting the sequence's most obvious influence, the French Connection, that includes its very own famous car chase that is often considered the gold standard for these set pieces. Reeve saying in a GQ interview, "Car culture is an important part of who and what Batman is. My first Batmobile was the Lincoln Futura from the 60s television series. I was obsessed with it. I had my own Corgi model. We'd seen the Batmobile as a gothic rocket. We'd seen it as a tank.
I gotta get me one of those.
And this was the Batman in year 2, who doesn't have a Lucius Fox figure helping him out. Wanted him to be a gearhead in his garage, working on a kind of bashed up car kit. I wanted the cars to look out retro and familiar, like the Dodge Charger or Challenger, but also unlike anything you'd seen before. James and I started talking about a bunch of people, amazing car people, including a guy called Ash Thorpe, who did some great work for us. Amazing experience to get to make your own Batmobile. You need to be able to perform like a muscle car, but you can't drive around the Batmobile without being seen, so you're only doing that when you can do something purpose-driven. One of my other references was the Plymouth Fury, Stephen King's Christine. The purpose of the car, for me, was to be a creature like in a horror film. It's meant to intimidate. However, most notably, The movie references back to earlier cinema with the type that it's shot with. Mentioned in the beginning, the movie's common criticism in the superhero genre, first voiced by Martin Scorsese, was that the genre was not cinema, but more like a roller coaster, going to apply people's more basic instincts to entertain. So in response, the Batman cinematography seemed to almost constantly want to remind its audience of the camera, the process behind the scenes. Shooting with a custom detuned RE alpha anamorphic lens to add that look of heightened perspective as cinematic.
Ari worked with us to build a set of lenses, which meant that they had inbuilt resolution, but then the edges fell off. Sometimes we looked at it and went, whoa, people are going to never employ us again.
Anamorphic lens famously used to look cinematic, invented in the 20s and put into wide use in the 50s to bring people back to cinemas.
Famed Sorbonne optical scientist Henri Chrétien demonstrates the anamorphoscopic lens for the CinemaScope system.
Presented itself as better than the 4:3 frame television, reinvented with a commonly used frame, expanding to more appealing 35mm print onto a 4:3 frame, giving an almost square image. An anamorphic lens, when filming, condensed its image to a smaller frame on film, and then were projected as a second lens attached to the projector to stretch it out again. This, however, giving some differences to the more traditionally used spherical lenses, causing curved bulk, which in stretching the small blurred sources of light to form a circular to an oval shape. It distorts space slightly, blowing out the forefront noticeable if lines are going across the frame. The focus fall changes in the sharpness and softness of an image, and the fall have increased in the difference between the sharp and darkness. Then, most commonly, lens flares, where light catches the camera, and finally a wider field of view. These aspects, all considered to look more cinematic, are enlisted in movies of the Batman's inspiration, such as Chinatown or Seven. His lengths to imitate cinematic frame dirty the image to make the viewer aware there is a camera there. Lens flares throughout the movie tell the audience there is a light that is affecting the camera as it enters the lens.
There's a way in which beauty can be, you can look at it and it can remove you and it can become an object that you're watching from a distance and admiring, as opposed to, in a way, it's about making things imperfect and not letting things be too clean. The movie had to have a very visceral side to it, and that it happens in the visual. It's a critical part of it. We're trying to take you into an experience.
The fact that even though the movie was shot digitally, the filmmakers went back, scanning the film onto 35mm film, before scanning it back to obtain the look of film. All these little details going into the look of the image, as well as the thematic response of the movie, hinting to cinema history, even though not mentioned it already, playing the same sound as the conversation to signify a moment of realization. Or the idea of vengeance in a city, going back to 70s films like Death Wish. Or the acclimatization of Batman's world, skillfully used such as The Godfather. Small details like this link the movie to cinema's past, to cinema as a whole, an attempt from filmmakers to reinvent the superhero genre to look, as it is, as cinema.
Hi, this is Luke. If you liked that video, please like and subscribe, and click the bell icon for notifications about new videos.